Welcome to this edition of Great Books, a lively discussion of a selection from the canon of exceptional literature. Here's your host, Jack Hatfield.
Welcome. I hope you enjoyed the show. We're going to have Jake give us a brief introduction to Thoreau's work. It's out of Walden. Jake?
Where I lived and what I live for is the second chapter of Walden. It's one of only two books that Henry David Thoreau ever published, although he was a prolific journaler, I guess you can say, who wrote in his notebooks on a nearly daily basis. Fiercely independent during his lifetime, Thoreau turned his exceptional talents, which were both practical and literary, to many things. He was a philosopher, an abolitionist, and a tax resister. He was a surveyor, a naturalist, several times a school teacher. He was good with children. He loved them. He was also a historian and a factory hand in his father's pencil factory. He was very handy with tools and used to hard work and a hard life. When his searching mind became infected with the transcendentalism of Ralph Waldo Emerson, the Harvard-educated Thoreau gave up plans of a regular profession and devoted himself to literature and the study of nature. An adoring protege of Emerson and mentored by him, Thoreau has come down to us as the second leading figure in the Transcendentalist movement that flowered in New England and centered around Concord, Massachusetts, which was Thoreau's lifelong home. From Concord, he seldom traveled very far, although he knew the area around Concord like the back of his hand. The Transcendentalists were an eclectic movement, a kind of romantic philosophy of idealistic naturalism, which emerged in New England as a sort of rebellion, partly by way of Unitarianism, and was definitely against New England's rationalistic Puritan pietism. In Thoreau's version, as exemplified in Where I Lived and What I Live For, nature symbolizes purity and simplicity, an essential embodiment, so to speak, of the eternal realities of the heart of things. These realities are a kind of natural goodness and wisdom, the seeds of which we all possess at birth, but which become corrupted by society and socialization. The ideal aim of life, according to Thoreau, is to dig down and recreate the initial promises of these simple gifts to enhance life. In our chapter from Walden, Thoreau introduces us to his vision by some reminiscences about his past imaginings of farm ownership, which is his way of situating himself in his world of experience. Having completed this preamble, he moves to what he calls his experiment in the present, which Thoreau tells us began on July 4th, 1845, which was just a few days short of his 28th birthday. He begins with a description of his self-built cabin and its situation on Walden Pond, which is sprinkled with reflective asides, and he goes on from there to explain that he went to the woods to front the essential facts of life. Thence follows his reflections upon appearance and reality, time and eternity, and his definition of the true life task of burrowing into one's natural and experiential environment until one finds oneself a place to stand, which for Thoreau is a kind of simplicity that permits experiencing life to the fullest. Thoreau died serenely in 1862, probably of tuberculosis. However, his account of his 2 years at Walden Pond still inspires Americans to see the world through his ideals and visions, feeling through its reading what Emerson termed of Thoreau a superiority of character, which addresses all men with a native authority.
Okay. We don't have to discuss it after that.
Brilliant summary.
What kind of guy was it? And what did he live for, to take something out of the title? What was his motivations? How is he presenting himself in this piece?
Well, I think he's both a teacher and a preacher. I think he does both in this chapter. Right on the very first page, on page 135, he talks about for a man is rich in proportion to the number of things he can afford to let go, okay, let alone. I think he's trying to teach us that. In the book, he talks about simplicity. He talks about reduction, reduce all the stuff in your life. I don't know, is that teaching or preaching? I first put down teacher, then I put preacher, and then I said both.
It's right in that time-honored New England tradition of both. That's kind of what I thought.
Another thing he said, he never got his finger burned by possession. He never owned anything. The only thing he ever owned was a tent.
And the cabin.
Pardon me?
And a cabin.
And a cabin.
And a boat.
Yeah, and a boat. Yeah, but never a house.
Didn't he say owning a house and
some
farm?
seeds.
Didn't he say owning a house and farm was like being in jail?
And jail.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
He said
And
no
he came
difference.
close to buying a home.
He was an apostle of transcendentalism, you could say, if you want to make a preacher out of him. An apostle of transcendentalism.
Right.
Yeah, I think he lived for. I mean, I think that actually Jake stated it, pretty well. That he lived that the simplicity was a means to an end. The end being to dig down and experience, as he said, to front experience, to get down to what was absolutely essential in life, and therefore to find a place to stand. I actually like that way of expressing it. That the image of putting your feet down through mud in a stream and going further and further down through the mud until you finally find the rocky surface underneath, and then you could stand on it.
What is the rocky surface?
I think for him, I think it was. Yeah, for him, I think it was. It was.
Well,
It was.
Doesn't mean anything to me.
I think for him, it was that by doing this, you discover what is essential, what really is the essence of life, and you're better able to distinguish between that and what's superfluous, which is the whole thing about simplicity. Yeah. And by doing so you create the best possible circumstances. Once you understand once you have a foundation like that, and you can distinguish between the essential and the superfluous, you have the best possible foundation for allowing he seems to think that we're sort of naturally good and naturally noble, and that we lose that. He talks about children knowing that, having that immediate perception, and then losing it as they get older. The idea being that our nobler selves can then emerge.
Where did he get the money? One of the thoughts I had, he's preaching.
Yeah, I know. Where did he get the money for this? I wondered about
Where'd you get
that.
the money to build
Basically,
that
he
house?
supported himself.
Well, he said in there, he says, I only have 10 cents in my pocket. But he tried to buy a farm, and till the farmer's wife turned him down. So and it had to be more than 10 cents. So someplace in there he's forgetting something.
Yeah, one of the thoughts that I had was that it was a rich man's philosophy, or you're broke, one or the other, but you're not in the middle.
It wasn't
he did
hard
have
to
a
get a
garden.
job in those days. He worked as a surveyor, and he was a very good surveyor.
Well,
And he was very good with his
when you're at
hands.
Walden Pond.
He worked in his father's pencil factory.
So he actually
saved
did.
the money to go to Walden Pond.
So basically, he participated in the life, and then until he could actually go to Walden Pond
he worked as
and
much
discover
as he
what
had
the
to
real
support
world was like.
himself.
But
Did he continue to work? Well, he doesn't say.
forget it.
Okay.
Is because it's not here. But
Yeah.
he really attacks jobs. I mean, he's saying, I forgot just.
He doesn't
Right.
want to be a slave to work.
He says, like, you spend your whole life building a railroad. And
Oh,
what's
yeah.
the railroad for? You're supposed to be in your house contemplating your existence, but you're working on a railroad so that other people leave their houses instead of contemplating their existence. And it's like a rat race.
That's right.
you
And
know?
he says, besides, who needs to leave their house? Who needs the railroad? We don't have to go very far.
Who needs newspapers?
Who needs newspapers?
Post office.
I've gotten 1 or 2 letters in my whole life. That's all we're worth the
His
postage.
point about the post office was funny.
You had to pay for the mail then. That's where
Yeah.
penny for your thoughts came from.
Oh, is that right?
I think so.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay.
As for work, he says,
That makes sense.
142, we haven't any of the consequence. He's saying that why should we live with such hurry and waste of life? We're determined to be starved before we are hungry.
Right.
Men say that stitch in time saves 9, so they take 1,000 stitches today to save 9 tomorrow.
I like the next line about we have the St. Vitus's dance and cannot possibly keep our heads still, that we're always moving around instead of sitting and contemplating and finding out what's real.
And then that image of if somebody goes to sleep for a half hour, the first thing he says when he wakes up is, "What's the news?" As if the world has really changed in the last half hour.
And
Go ahead.
and he says the news is the same story over and over again, except it happened to a different person.
Yeah.
And that there are realities that are just repeated, and once you've seen it once.
You've seen it once, a murder. You know
why do
what
you
the
have to
heck?
learn about it again?
Exactly. Remember when he gives the example of the people pushing on the glass, and then they break through. He says somebody with sufficient intelligence could have written that story 12 months before, and it would still be pretty accurate.
It says the same thing about
In
politics
1840.
in Spain. He said,
Right.
12 months from now, it's going to be the same story.
That's right.
He says this about news. He said, if you're acquainted with the principle, what do you care for a myriad instances and application? To a philosopher, all news, as it is called, is gossip. And they who edit and read it are old women over their tea.
Yeah.
It's like,
One of the things I liked was the title, Where I Live, was not just about geography, it was a philosophy, where I live. He makes that point over and over again about sites, okay, that you can create whatever you want as it relates to that piece of land. In your head.
Right, in your head.
In your head, where you live, okay? And when you think about it, our lives are more our inner lives than they are our outer lives.
But he wanted you to observe that.
But, yeah.
Bob, he wanted you to observe wherever you were and listen to your surroundings in a sense and accept them. And he wants you to burrow down to reality. He's not trying to reduce things. Simplicity doesn't mean reduction. It means getting to what he calls reality as opposed to whatever. Remember, he talks about the realometer and that other meter. What did he?
Yeah.
Nilometer.
The Nilometer, yeah.
In the end, but you know, but he does want a kind of a simplicity to life and elevation of purpose.
Well, he does say-
but he doesn't want you to. He's not against work. He just doesn't want it to take away from.
No, but he does say reduce. In fact, he's telling you to cut down on your meals.
Yeah.
I remember.
Why do you need
But he's-
three?
how do you
I
do
was
3
again-
and take 1?
No, he says one if necessary.
Yeah.
He said one if necessary.
Yeah.
But his concern is about the whole picture.
Right.
Remember, he talks about fishing and then he wants
Time.
the fishing in time, but then he wants to fish in a deeper sense. He wants to see the whole cosmos. You know, he's always expanding. When he gets down there, he has a place to stand. Then he's expanding. He says he's someplace. He talks about the whole world radiating out from himself
Yeah.
as he observes it. And look at the detail he uses when he describes Walden Pond and the house and all that stuff.
Do you think that his attitude was related to the time that he lived? As for example, today, you know, we pride ourselves in production. Okay, we increase our production every year.
I think it was true then.
Pardon me?
I think it was true then.
And
You think, that was my question. You
Not
think
only
it-
was it true, but I think that the country was really in the throes of a transition because the Industrial Revolution in the 1850s. So it was going from an agrarian society to one in which there was an emphasis on production. So he was part of this is a clarion call, really. You know, to hold it. You know, it's. I mean, William Buckley said, you know, the conservative stands athwart history and says halt. I mean, there's that. You have that sense. I mean, he goes deeper than that. But I think you're right that there's a movement in society going forward. He doesn't like it. He wants to stop.
Maureen, you were going to say.
One of the things I also liked is that he kept bringing in divinity into his descriptions. And transcendentalism believes that there's God indwelling within each of us. And when he described his house, it was like, well, outside is Olympus. You know, and
Right.
it's like as if I lived in the heavens among the stars. And he called himself a child of Aurora, which is the goddess of the dawn.
Yeah.
And again, there's this divinity theme running through his writing.
Well, he also said that there their men spend their lives talking about glorifying God to live for the next life. I thought it was sort of anti-religious.
I did too.
Did you?
Well,
Only in a certain sense.
in a certain sense, yeah.
Yeah.
No, that quote was, for most men, it appears to me, are in a strange uncertainty about it, whether it is of the devil or of God, and
Right.
have somewhat
Somewhat
hastily
Right.
concluded that it is a chief end of man here to glorify God and enjoy him forever. And I think what he's saying is that our chief goal in life is to step back, decide what's real for ourselves, and find the divinity within ourselves. Because he talked like 1 in 1,000,000 people have, 1 in 100 million people have a life of the intellect, and only 1 in
that
more
was
than
poets
that.
and that's
are
poets and artists, and before that it was
Eh,
the intellectuals were a little bit lower down.
Yeah, and are poets and have a divine life, and that's like his highest
Yeah,
goal.
he thought that
is
you wanted
be
to
a
live for
poet and have a
virtue and
divine
nobility.
life.
What do you make of the fact that he italicized somewhat hastily?
Because they didn't
Yeah.
really see what was real. They didn't go through the muck and the appearances to find out what was real.
Well, why not
They
just-
didn't bother spend the time doing that, and that's what he was doing on Walnut Pond, is
But I mean,
searching through that.
But what is added to that thought by making somewhat hastily in italics, as opposed to just keeping it in regular type? I mean, to me, it throws some element of uncertainty is the wrong word, but basically some element of pulling back, not quite making the statement, being a little bit cagey with it. I had the or qualifying it
So
a
he doesn't
little
get in
bit.
trouble?
I'm wondering if he.
Right.
But the rest of
He
it.
didn't worry about that, though.
But I was going to say the rest
He
of it.
wouldn't pay his taxes, went to jail.
Yeah, I was going to say the rest of it is not a man who worries about getting in trouble. So I'm not sure. But that was my original thought. But then I thought, yeah, this guy doesn't care about getting in trouble.
Yeah, I didn't read it the way, you know.
But yeah,
He
I
says
did.
there's
I
a
mean,
lot
that
of
was just my first thought, but
there's a
I
lot of
didn't know what
religious
else.
language in there. You know, when he's the raw stuff, he's talking about this is every day is a new birth, and here he's very activistic in a sense, but he's activistic in a sense that he tenses up and tries to be alert and as alive as possible to everything that's going on around him. You know, and then he says, I jump in and take a bath every day.
And that's a
which,
religious,
adds
it's a
to the
religious, no, it was a
experience.
religious ritual, or it was a
It's a
religious
ritual.
performance, not an experience. This was part of his religion. He said it's a
I thought he
performance.
said experience.
No,
Jeff.
he said it was a
I-
performance.
He didn't call it religion, though.
Well, it's a
He
ritual.
called it
Use the
religious.
word religious.
Yes, he did.
It's a
Use the word
religious,
religious.
it's a religious ritual.
experience.
That whole business with Dawn, that's his, every day is a new recreation, a new
I
creation.
thought that was a
Yeah, I
great
did too.
concept.
Yeah, that was a great. I thought that was great.
Here's a quote I liked. Is, if men would steadily observe realities only and not allow themselves to be deluded, life to compare it with such things as we know would be a fairy tale and the Arabian Nights entertainment. If we respected only what is inevitable and has a right to be, music and poetry would resound along the streets. So he's saying not that there's a religious, spiritual outside the earth or outside of ourselves. It's in the pond. It's in
It's in
the
nature.
birds and the nature and all that. So
And
yeah.
ultimately, it's within. It's
Yeah,
within
yeah.
your own nature.
Right.
But didn't you
Well,
get
only
the
because you're
idea
a part
that
of nature.
Okay.
didn't you get the
makes sense.
idea he didn't work?
Yeah.
Oh, very much so.
And now, if we all follow that, who's going to make the shoes? Who's going to make the vegetables
No,
and
it's
the farm?
yeah.
If we all follow that,
Now, in one of his books, he did say he worked each year for 6 weeks, and that was enough to give him
live
enough
on.
money to live on.
yeah.
Let me
So
ask
he
a
did work
question.
He
hard
didn't
for a
think
while.
everybody had to do that, though.
Let
he
me
wasn't a
ask-
capitalist.
He didn't think everybody
Ask
was
a question
capable.
on here.
That's true.
It says on page 140, it says,
Well,
moral reform is the effort to throw off sleep. And then I'll skip a couple lines. To be awake is to be alive. I've never met a man who was quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face?
How could
What's
I have
his
looked him in the
You've
face? That
been
was a great.
godlike. You cannot look on the face of God,
God,
and
right,
live.
that's kind of what I thought too.
You know, Moses, when he went up on a mountain,
I don't think
God
he,
said, hide yourself.
I didn't get that.
No.
Repeat it again.
But that
Jack.
last one, to be awake is to be alive.
Right.
I've never yet met a man who was quite awake. How could I have looked him in the face?
You read that in the face of God?
I thought my first thought was Jake's, that it was a religious reference that anybody at the time would have used, would have known, would have understood, which is that one does not look on the face of God and live. You know, in one of the stories of Moses, I guess, when he was Moses wants to see God's face, and he says, "You can't." He says, "I'll walk by where you're sitting, but I'll turn my back to you." And so, you can't look at the. I mean, a man like this would be godlike. A man who was fully awake would be godlike, and he wouldn't be. But then, when I reread it, I thought it's almost as if, and this isn't this doesn't preclude what I just said, maybe another layer. It's as if such a man could not but help someone who was alert to the importance of being awake, like Thoreau, but wasn't himself as awake as this man. Such a man would have to make Thoreau feel guilty and inadequate.
That's true too.
Well, maybe that's true, yeah. Okay.
He's a big morning person, wasn't he?
Why?
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Yeah, all the
He's a morning
ideas,
person.
all the good ideas,
All the good ideas.
all the inner stuff that comes that's spiritual is all in the morning. After 11, you're finished.
After dark, you're finished because you got to use kerosene lamps.
Yeah, that's right.
That brings up a question. Do you think he's presenting something that applies just to him? I mean, there's a lot of people that aren't morning people. I'm a morning person. My wife is a night times person. Yeah. Is he describing something that just fits him?
Oh, no.
And a
I
few
think
other people?
there's the preacher part. I think he's preaching.
He's exhorting people.
He's telling people,
okay.
be creative.
What was your reaction? Is this doable in our time, in our lives?
Yes.
Okay, what is doable?
Yeah. Well,
different style.
I think slowing down, okay, the rat race, don't be part of the rat race. How do you hold work? Okay, how do you hold life? What is life? And I kept on thinking, this guy is not a capitalist. Okay, if we were in today's society, okay, they'd laugh at him. Okay, because we are such a
We don't have to be a capitalist to do things. There's a real.
Capitalist is investment. That's just wise investment of time, talent, or energy in whatever you want to invest in.
Well, for most of us, it's our talent, okay, and our labor that we're investing.
Well, yes,
and you want to do that.
What were you going to say, Jack?
We all have inborn talents, if you want to say, and wanting to express those. And some people do it in work that enjoy it. He's saying farmers never like their work. I mean, he's kind of implying it. And a lot of them love that. And a lot of them really get enjoyment of providing a family food.
Jack, how many articles have you read in the past couple of years about the amount of time people are spending at work? Okay?
Well, some people love work.
No, but they are required to spend that time.
And some people are materialistic when they want a bigger house, a better car,
sure.
and they're wasting their lives on the.
I think what we're responding to is this false dichotomy that he's setting up. I mean, I think even if he doesn't actually come out and say it, he certainly gives the impression that working is not a sphere of fulfillment.
That's what I got.
You don't find yourself in work. Work is a necessary evil, but and this is one of the reasons why you were saying earlier. Could this actually work in the here and now? I'm getting back to your question. What can it teach us now? I think he's trying not to appear elitist, but it comes across that way. That people who have to work to support a family, for example, are probably not going to be able to do this. They're not going to be able to work for 6 weeks.
Some of them would want to do this. I mean,
some of them would not want to, and some of them would. But the ones who would.
Real joy in work for a lot of people.
Well, that's it. And I think he was rebelling against that. I mean, I don't
think he was. He's just saying this is my kind of work.
But he was
doing that.
But he was opposing. He was opposing work to. He was opposing the necessity to work, to creating the circumstances in which one could discover oneself. I think that's the opposition, and what you're saying is that that's not true. That people can discover themselves and work, and I agree. But I don't. And I think that maybe if we pushed him to the wall, he would say that. But the impression he was giving here was that work is really not where you discover yourself.
Since we got a few minutes left, I was already saying our reaction to it.
We're running out.
I'm sorry.
I was saying our reaction. What is your reaction to it? What's everyone's reaction? We know what he says, but
I agree with him that the life of the mind is very important. Whether you're working or not, it's that what you think is really good. And I love
sure.
the way he said, to affect the quality of the day is the highest of arts.
Sure.
And
Great
you
line.
do that, yes, you can carve and paint the very atmosphere and medium through which we look.
Yeah.
That it's in our attitude.
Yeah.
That's the important things
Where you
in life
live.
come through our attitude.
It's again related to the title. You're living in your mind.
Well, he's got a very activistic life right below that, where he says he wants to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to put to rout all that was not life. I mean, he really wants to live in every way actively.
Yeah,
Did you
even though-
find
even though
yourself
he says-
questioning your life?
Oh, sure, of course.
When
I
you
mean,
read
you
this?
have to. You have to
I
to some
reacted
degree.
against when I
You
read this.
reacted well.
When I read this in college, this was a dream. You know, I go, wow.
Yeah,
And now I read it and
it's
say,
like me.
of all the enjoyments I've gotten out of life, some of what he talks about I have, but a lot of it I haven't. I've gotten more joy out of raising a family and working and doing a lot of those things.
So did he, by
Things
the
which are
way.
externally oriented and motivated. When you're working for the good of your children, when you're working to support your children, you're really supporting something external to you. You're
As
not
well-
cultivating.
No.
You're not cultivating. This is like, in a way, this is like a throwback to the medieval times, where there was a spiritual elite. They lived in monasteries, and their purpose in life was to pursue holiness and support themselves as much as they had to. But that was everybody else was the hoi polloi. And the Protestant Reformation, correct me if I'm wrong, part of that was the elevation of the everyday, of your everyday life as the place where
a vocation.
holiness, as a vocation, as the place where you discover yourself.
You know,
this is like a throwback.
Before we end, there was a quote he had. I know of no more encouraging fact that the unquestionability of man to elevate life by a conscious endeavor.
Yes.
I just
Yeah, that was a great line.
Wasn't that a great?
That's a great line.
Great line.
He had a lot of things that really resonated, but
And
then when
he's
you put the
telling
whole thing
us
together-
about choice. We have a choice. We can live the life he's talking about, or we can be what he would call dumb and stupid and be part of the rat race.
Bestial, almost.
Yeah.
My only question is, would he have owned an iPad?
Oh, yes.
Probably.
He was very good with things. He
I
invented
forgot
the
where
kind of lead
we
he used in a
were
pencil
half
for his
Really?
factory. Yeah,
Well, we're going to have to wrap it up. So
Yeah.
thank you all. I hope you enjoyed the discussion, and I hope you'll join us next month for a new book out of the canon of important works. So thank you, panel. And we didn't get enough time to discuss it all, but it was a very easy and fun read.
Easy and fun read. Good selection. We've had some good selections.